The sound of children crying in the night is supposed to move mountains. It's supposed to shake the foundations of any home, sending parents rushing through darkened hallways with hearts pounding and arms ready to comfort. But in the Hartwell mansion, perched on 3 acres of manicured perfection in Connecticut's wealthiest enclave, those cries had become as routine as the grandfather clock chiming in the foyer. Night after night, 2 small voices would rise from opposite ends of the second floor, their sobs muffled by Egyptian cotton pillowcases and heavy mahogany doors, echoing through rooms filled with everything money could buy except the one thing they needed most. Marcus Hartwell had built an empire. His hedge fund managed billions, his name appeared on Forbes lists, and his donations funded hospital wings and university buildings. He was a titan of industry, a man who could move markets with a single phone call, who commanded respect in every boardroom from Manhattan to Shanghai. But he couldn't stop his own children from crying themselves to sleep. The irony wasn't lost on him during those rare moments when guilt pierced through his armor of justifications. He told himself he was building their future, securing their legacy, teaching them the value of independence. His own father had been absent, after all, and Marcus had turned out fine. Better than fine, he'd turned out exceptional. His wife, Victoria, had her own battlefields to conquer. Charity galas didn't organize themselves, and someone had to maintain their position in society. The Metropolitan Museum benefit, the ballet board, the private school fundraisers, these obligations required constant attention, impeccable presentation, and a smile that never wavered even when her feet ached from 5-inch heels. She loved her children, of course she did, but love wasn't enough to run a household of this magnitude. Love didn't coordinate staff schedules, menu plans, or the intricate social calendar that kept them relevant. 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old James had become collateral damage in their parents' pursuit of more. More money, more influence, more recognition. The children had separate wings of the house, separate nannies who changed with alarming frequency, separate schedules designed by child development experts who never spent more than an hour observing them. They had tutors for Mandarin, violin, tennis, and chess. They had rooms full of toys they'd never asked for and birthday parties attended by children whose parents wanted business connections. What they didn't have was someone to check under the bed for monsters, to remember how Emma liked her sandwiches cut diagonally, or that James slept with his stuffed elephant facing the window because he said it kept watch for him. Rosa Delgado had been cleaning houses in America for 15 years. She'd left El Salvador with nothing but a prayer and a promise to her dying mother that she'd make something of herself. She'd scrubbed toilets in office buildings, washed windows in high-rises, and cleaned vacation homes for people who spent more on a weekend than she earned in a year. She sent money home to her younger siblings, attended English classes at night, and never complained about the ache in her knees or the chemical burns on her hands. The Hartwell position was supposed to be a blessing: better pay, regular hours, one family instead of a dozen different clients each week. But from her first day, Rosa felt the wrongness in that beautiful house. She'd grown up poor, sharing a 2-room home with 8 people, sleeping 3 to a bed, but her home had been filled with laughter and the smell of her mother's pupusas and the certainty that someone would notice if you were sad. This mansion had everything except warmth. It was a museum where children tiptoed through their own lives, trying not to disturb the carefully arranged perfection. She heard them crying that first night, a sound that shot through her heart like electricity. Rosa stood in the hallway outside her small room on the 3rd floor, torn between her place and her conscience. The handbook the house manager had given her was explicit. Staff were to maintain professional boundaries, avoid interference with family matters, and under no circumstances enter the children's rooms after 7 p.m. unless specifically summoned. She'd already been fired from one position for overstepping, for suggesting to a mother that her daughter might be depressed. She couldn't afford to lose this job. But the crying continued, and Rosa thought of her own nieces and nephews back home, how her sister would move heaven and earth for them, how family meant showing up even when it was hard. She thought of her mother, who'd worked her fingers raw but always had time to braid Rosa's hair and sing her songs. Before she could talk herself out of it, Rosa was walking down the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. Emma's room came first. Rosa knocked softly and pushed open the door to find the little girl curled into a ball, clutching a stuffed rabbit. The nightlight cast shadows across her tear-stained face, and she looked up at Rosa with surprise and something else, hope, maybe, or just exhaustion. "Why are you crying, Pequeña?" Rosa asked gently, sitting on the edge of the bed despite every rule she was breaking. Emma hiccuped, considering whether to trust this stranger. "I had a bad dream. About being lost in a big store and nobody could find me." "That sounds very scary," Rosa said, smoothing the hair back from Emma's forehead. "But you're not lost now. You're right here, safe in your bed." "But what if I have the dream again?" Rosa thought for a moment, then began to sing, softly, a lullaby her mother had sung to her. The words were in Spanish, but the melody was universal: safety, comfort, the promise that someone was watching over you. Emma's eyes began to close, her breathing evening out. Rosa stayed until she was certain the girl was asleep, then moved to James's room. The boy wasn't crying anymore, but he wasn't asleep either. He sat up in bed, his elephant clutched to his chest, his eyes wide in the darkness. "I'm not supposed to cry," he told Rosa when she appeared in his doorway. "Daddy says big boys don't cry." Rosa felt anger flash through her, hot and righteous, but she kept her voice gentle. "Your daddy is wrong about that. Everyone cries sometimes, even grown-ups, even your daddy, I bet, though maybe he doesn't let you see." "Really?" James looked skeptical but intrigued. "Really? Crying is just how our hearts talk when words aren't enough. Now, what's keeping you awake?" That night began a ritual that Rosa knew could cost her everything. After finishing her official duties, she would slip through the quiet house to check on Emma and James. She learned their fears and favorites, their inside jokes and secret wishes. She learned that Emma was terrified of disappointing people, that she practiced her violin until her fingers ached because she'd heard her mother tell someone on the phone that Emma might actually amount to something. She learned that James had nightmares about his parents forgetting to come home, that he sometimes hid in closets just to see if anyone would notice he was missing. Rosa began leaving small signs of her presence: a glass of water on Emma's nightstand with a slice of lemon, just how she liked it, James's elephant positioned on the window seat each morning as if it had kept faithful watch all night. She started arriving early to make them breakfast, real breakfast, not the protein smoothies the nutritionist had mandated. She made them scrambled eggs with cheese, toast with butter and jam, and she sat with them while they ate, asking about their dreams and actually listening to their answers. The changes were subtle at first. Emma started smiling more, volunteering answers in her tutoring sessions instead of sitting in anxious silence. James's nightmares became less frequent. They started leaving their bedroom doors open at night, as if they no longer felt the need to seal themselves away from the world. 3 months into Rosa's employment, everything changed. Victoria had to attend an emergency board meeting in Boston, and Marcus was already in London. The regular nannies were off for the weekend due to a scheduling mix-up that no one had bothered to correct. The house manager, in a rare moment of practical thinking, asked Rosa if she could watch the children overnight. Those 48 hours became the watershed moment in all their lives. Rosa didn't try to maintain the usual rigid schedule. Instead, she took Emma and James to the public library, where they sat cross-legged on the floor reading picture books. She took them to a park. Not the private playground at their home, but a real park where other children played, where Emma learned to pump her legs on the swing and James discovered the joy of digging in a sandbox. She taught them to make her mother's pupusas, letting them get flour on their faces and cheese on their fingers, laughing when James declared himself the best cook in the world. They made a fort in the living room using couch cushions and blankets, something that would have horrified the interior designer who'd spent 6 months perfecting that space. They had a picnic dinner inside the fort, eating sandwiches and carrot sticks by flashlight. They told stories, played games where the only rule was to have fun, and when it was time for bed, both children asked Rosa to stay. "Can you sleep in our rooms tonight?" Emma asked, and before Rosa could explain why that might not be appropriate, James added, "Please. We sleep better when you're here." So Rosa dragged a chair between their 2 rooms, positioning herself in the hallway where she could see both of them, and she kept vigil while they slept peacefully for the first time in months. She didn't hear Marcus come home early Sunday evening. Didn't hear him climb the stairs, looking for his children. Didn't know he was there until she heard his sharp intake of breath. Rosa jerked awake in her chair, her heart sinking as she saw him standing there, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Hartwell," she began, standing quickly, preparing for the dismissal she knew was coming. I can explain. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his children, both sleeping with small smiles on their faces, their breathing easy and calm. He was looking at the space between their rooms where Rosa had stationed herself. And something in his face cracked open. How long? He asked quietly. How long have they been sleeping like this? Rosa swallowed hard. Since I started watching them at night, sir. About 3 months. 3 months. He said it like he was testing the words, trying to make sense of them. And before that, they cried every night. Every single night, Mr. Hartwell. She watched the information hit him, watched his face contort with something that might have been pain or guilt or recognition. He walked past her into Emma's room, stood beside her bed, and really looked at his daughter perhaps for the first time in months. Then he did the same with James. When he emerged, his eyes were wet. I didn't know, he said, and Rosa believed him because sometimes the truth is just that simple and that devastating. I didn't know they were unhappy. I thought. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. I thought I was giving them everything. You were giving them things, Rosa said carefully. But children don't need things, Mr. Hartwell. They need someone to see them, to know them, to care when they're scared. What happened next surprised them both. Instead of firing her, instead of retreating behind anger or defensiveness, Marcus Hartwell sat down on the hallway floor, his expensive suit wrinkling against the carpet, and he put his head in his hands. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to be what they need. Rosa sat back down in her chair. Then learn. It's not too late, Mr. Hartwell. They still want you. They still wait for you to notice them. That conversation in the darkened hallway became the turning point. Marcus called Victoria home immediately. They had the kind of conversation parents should have had months earlier. Hard, honest, painful. Victoria cried for the first time in years, really cried, not the delicate tears she'd perfected for fundraisers. They looked at their calendars, their priorities, their lives, and they didn't like what they saw. The changes didn't happen overnight. Marcus couldn't abandon his company, and Victoria couldn't quit all her commitments. But they started saying no to things, started blocking off time that was sacred. Marcus began leaving the office at 6, started having dinner with his children, sitting on the floor to play with them. Victoria reduced her board positions, started being home for breakfast, volunteering in their classrooms. They were clumsy at first, uncertain, but their children were generous with second chances. Rosa stayed on, but her role evolved. She became less of a housekeeper and more of a bridge between the family the Hartwells were and the family they wanted to become. She taught Victoria her mother's lullaby. She showed Marcus how to check for monsters under the bed, how to listen for what his children weren't saying. She helped them understand that presence wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up, about being consistently, imperfectly there. A year later, the Hartwell mansion sounded different. There was still crying sometimes, because that's what children do, but now there were footsteps responding immediately to those cries. There was laughter echoing through rooms that had been too quiet for too long. There were family dinners where the food wasn't catered and nobody checked their phones. There were bedtime rituals involving stories and songs and conversations about the day. Emma stopped having nightmares about being lost. James no longer hid in closets. They learned what it felt like to be seen, to be known, to matter more than any deal or dinner party. They learned that love isn't something you schedule, it's something you live. Rosa still worked for the Hartwells, but now she was family. She taught Emma to make pupusas for her 7th grade Spanish class project. She danced with James at his elementary school talent show. She became the grandmother the children had never known, the heart of a home that had finally learned to beat. And sometimes, late at night, Marcus would find her sitting in that same hallway chair, and he'd thank her for saving his family. Rosa would shake her head and tell him the truth. She hadn't saved anyone. She'd just reminded them what they already had, what they'd almost lost, each other. The rest, the hard work of becoming a family, of choosing presence over prestige, of measuring success by bedtime smiles instead of bank balances, that was all them. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how many mansions you own if your children cry themselves to sleep. It doesn't matter how successful you are if you miss your own life happening. The Hartwells learned what Rosa had always known. The greatest wealth isn't what you accumulate. It's what you give, who you show up for, how you love when no one's watching. That's the inheritance that actually matters. That's what transforms a house into a home.